Padaya Utame Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tina Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityana. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravari Prachari Sesha Sunyamadi Tyacha Deshata Se Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachari Nirvishesha Shunyari Ashacharishata Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Goranga, Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Gopi Janabhava, Girivardhari, Gopi Janabhava, Girivardhari, Gopi Janabhava, Girivardhari, Yasodhanandana Prajalpa, Yasodhanandana Prajalpa Yasodhanandana Prajalpa Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Bhava Girivaradhari Gopijana Bhava Girivaradhari Yasodananda Prajana Ramjana Yasodananda Prajana Yamunatira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Prabhupada Paramahamsa Parivrajapacharya Ashtotara Satsasi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Ananta Kota Vaishnava Vrinda ki Namacharya Shri Haridasa Thakur ki Prem Segaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki Shri Vrindavan Dham ki Shri Mayapur Dham ki Jagannath Puri Dham ki Rangamaya ki Jamuna Maya ki Tulasi Deva ki Bhakti Deva ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki Lord Chaitanya's Harinam Sankirtan ki Brihat Madanga ki Shri Prabhupada ki Shri Gaurnitai ki Hare Gaur Premanandi, O glorious to the assembled devotees, O glorious Shri Guru Granth Om Vishnu Budai, Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shimati, Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namani, Namaste Saraswati Deve Goswami Pachari, Nirvasesha Sanyavari Pastachari Chita. Vanchaka Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vicha, Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananda Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupagadamaya Tadati Swaha Pradantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sarvajatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusate Devi Pranamami Hare Priya. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever we are. In this holy month of Damodar. And we're continuing our reading from Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita, by Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada. So last week we discussed a little bit about Prayash in general concerning this second verse of the Nectar of Instruction. We'll proceed on today with the next section of the second verse. We haven't finished it yet. And today we're going to be talking on Prajalpa, very popular subject matter, which we're all probably quite familiar with. And in the purpose, if you go to maybe Rasika and Prabhu can put the verse on the board, we'll chant the verse on the screen, if we can. Rasika, here it comes. So this is the Text number 2 of the Upadeshamrita. Kindly repeat. Atyahara prayashascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lolyam cha shadbir bhakti vinashyati. Atyahara prayashascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lolyam cha shadbir bhakti vinashyati. Atyahara prayashascha Prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha cha shadvir bhakti vinashyati. Atyahara prayashascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha cha shadvir bhakti vinashyati. And the translation of this verse, hold on, go to the word for word first. We dealt with ati ahara to some extent, overeating, too much collecting, prayasa, to some degree last week, over endeavoring, cha and prajalpa, idle talking. And we may cover the next one, I don't know, niyama, rules and regulations, agraha, too much attachment to, or agraha, too much neglect of, janasangaha, association with worldly minded persons. Cha and lolyam, ardent longing or greed. Cha and shadbihi, by these 6. Bhaktihi, devotional service. Vinashyati, is destroyed. Translation, and a little bit we read the purport of Prajalpa today by Srila Prabhupada. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities: eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters, practicing the scripture rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. 5, associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. So this devotional service can become spoiled when we're too entangled in these 6 practices, or these 6 obstacles on the path of devotional service. If you wish to follow, this will be, I don't know if you've got the book or are you on some mobile or internet or something or other. But this is more or less, let's see, about halfway through the purport. And it talks about Prajalpa. Another impediment, keep going, it's quite a long purport. Keep going a bit further. Yeah, keep going. There's one more page. There it is. Another impediment is prajalpa, unnecessary talking. When we mix with a few friends, we immediately begin unnecessary talking, sounding just like croaking toads. If we must talk, we should talk about the Krishna consciousness movement. Those outside of the Krishna consciousness movement are interested in reading heaps of newspapers, magazines, and novels, solving crossword puzzles, and doing many other nonsensical things. In this fashion, people simply waste their valuable time and energy. In the Western countries, old men retire from active life, play cards, fish, watch television, and debate about useless socio-political schemes. All these and other frivolous activities are included in the Prajalpa category. Intelligent persons interested in Krishna consciousness should never take part in such activities. There's quite a short comment by Srila Prabhupada on Prajalpa. Just to expand a little bit on that subject matter, I'm going to read a little bit from the commentary by Sri Satyananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which you don't have probably. It's in a book called Bhakti Aloka. And to make it a little bit more broad, the actual word Prajalpa he describes here is talking with one another. It's not necessarily useless talk. Is Prajalpa or Jalpana literally means conversing with another person. And there's a positive way of Prajalpa. And that, of course, we all know. Kirtan, offering prayers, reciting scriptures are all also called Jalpana or Prajalpa. But we generally use the term Prajalpa, and not generally, Prabhupada specifically uses it here, as idle talk or mundane talk. Specifically mundane talk, Prabhupada uses the word, but it can, like all other, let's say, even anarthas and various kinds, even the offenses in devotional service, there's a positive side to everything. It's like collecting, we collect for Krishna. It's not a question of over-collecting in one sense, if it's actually used for Krishna. We endeavor for Krishna, it's not really over-endeavoring. It can be, that's another subject in itself in terms of balancing our devotional lives. But the principle of endeavoring for Krishna and endeavoring more and more and more to serve Krishna is not in the category of this verse. And similarly, talking about Krishna, or Prabhupada says here in his purport, talking about the Krishna conscious movement is not considered Prajalpa in this terms, because it's favorable to the practice of devotional service. So the real meaning in this verse, at least in terms of it being an obstacle to our devotional practice, is when it becomes unfavorable. So what is that unfavorable? All Prajalpas that are unfavorable to Krishna's service are adverse to devotional service. The practitioner should carefully give up Prajalpa. And we're surrounded by Prajalpa, literally. The pure devotees, they engage this tendency. One of the strongest tendencies of the tongue, we've already heard, one of the tendencies of the tongue is to tendency to eat, to satisfy the eating. In the first verses of one of the pushing senses. In the first section of this particular verse, the second verse of the Nectar of Instruction, Atihara, we heard that it doesn't just mean the tendency to eat more than required, by sure, but it includes all kinds of bhojana. Bhojana in its broadest sense means sense gratification. Seeing anything as an object of my sense gratification and trying to attain it. And then one begins prayasa, over-endeavoring to obtain mundane things which are difficult to obtain. Or to satisfy one's senses. One can never satisfy the unending senses or demands of the mind through the senses. It can never be completely satisfied. So we continue to endeavor, just like an ass with a stick in front of its nose. You put a carrot hanging from the stick and the ass continually tries to capture the carrot but never gets there. So people endeavor unendingly to try to achieve the impossible in this material world. Various forms of whatever it may be, of trying to achieve the spiritual perfection in the material world, so to speak, is unattainable. But people try. They spend their whole life trying to control this world, enjoy this world, etc., make a utopia in this world. But it's in this world, nature is to kalima shashvatam. So they over-endeavor. So in their prayas is also basically for that reason. And their prajalpa, their talk, is definitely for that reason. Whether it's in the educational field, social field, political field, economic field, whatever field it's in, even the religious field, is basically mundane. It's based upon material existence, upon illusion. this relative world, family affairs, everything is a source of entanglement within this material world, causing the living entity to become bound up in repeated birth and death. So talking is a very powerful, the tongue being the strongest of all the senses, having these two very powerful proclivities for eating and speaking. And it's very hard to control the tongue, as we know. We usually say this prayer before we honor prasada. Of all the senses, the tongue is the most difficult, voracious to control. Very hard to control the tongue in this world. But you, dear Krishna, have given us this nice Krishna prasadam, spiritual food, just to help us to conquer over the tongue. We can also overeat there. We've already heard that. If we eat more than required there, also it can be in the category of overeating. Atihara. So, yes, Prajalpa, that which is favorable to devotional service. And what is that? So that Prajalpa, the great devotees, they praise them. Prabhupada calls it silence when we're talking about Krishna. One of the characteristics of a devotee is silent. And that doesn't mean no sound. It means no mundane sound. We chant the holy name of Krishna. We try to talk about the pastimes of Krishna, the philosophy of Krishna, devotional service to Krishna, the mission of Krishna consciousness, movement, different things related at least to Krishna. Indirectly, everything is related, but the consciousness, with a conscious awareness of relating everything to Krishna, even the negative side, seeing the inebrieties of this world, and the fallacy of the endeavor of mundane persons to try to achieve perfection in this world. Sometimes I discuss for the sake of understanding the truth, for the sake of preaching, for the sake of, you could say, of helping us to become free of these tendencies. They may also come in the category of favorable on occasion. Not that we spend all our time talking about it, but that has to be understood. That form of indirect, you could say, indirect preaching is more or less in the beginning quite primary, especially when we're dealing with persons entangled in this world or with their entangled minds. We have to deal with so many external understandings and adjustments in order to try to convince our intelligence to become convinced not to endeavor in that regards, seeing the fallacy of material endeavor, etc., and the horrors of material existence. Sometimes these things are pointed out graphically by our acharyas. So let's look at some of the godless prajalpas, which are, generally speaking, the ones referred to in this verse, which are unfavorable, can spoil one's devotional service. Obviously, positive ones are not going to spoil our devotional service. They may not be in the right mood, they may not be in a pure consciousness, they may be motivated. So there is another aspect there that sometimes we utilize the philosophy or the pastimes or devotional service to achieve some selfish motivation. And that quite often happens. And there's so many examples of that even in the Shastras of persons who come with wrong motivations, but indulge or appear to engage in devotional service, but with an ulterior motive. So there's also another, you could say, anartha, another would be prajalpa also to a certain extent. But in the right association, they may also become purified. But in general, there are activities which are not at all related to faith, to devotional service, even in a somewhat unfavorable way. So here are some of them. I mean, useless talks, that's not just talking about unnecessary things. It may be necessary, for instance, sometimes to talk about the weather if we're going to be going out in the garden to farm or going on Sankirtan or whatever it is. It's sometimes necessary to find out what the weather is going to be in order to prepare ourselves so that we're ready for whatever the weather is. But just simply to talk about it and argue about it and debate about it discuss what different weather reports say about this thing, or how it was last week, or last year, or next year, or this thing. On and on it can go, just on a simple topic like that, what to speak of other topics of this world, be it politics, or sport, or social interactions, or wars, or whatever it is, all those things that you see in the news. We talk and talk, a complete waste of time. We can't do anything about it. It may be utilized sometimes in Krishna service in the form of preaching, but not more than required. Everything is to be understood in the framework of not more than required, whether it's eating or endeavoring, talking, everything. That which is required. We shouldn't waste our words or waste our time in this frivolous behavior. Arguments is a very common one over mundane things. We don't generally avoid an argue as such. You may speak the truth, which may not be in accordance with a mundane knowledge, not every case, or so-called mundane knowledge. So sometimes it may appear to be arguing, but he's just presenting the absolute truth. Arguing means on one's own, with one's own intellectual analysis. It's not just, difference of opinion exactly. Vaishnavas and Mayavadis have a difference of opinion. We may not spend our time arguing with them or debating or whatever you want to call it, but nonetheless they have a difference of opinion. But in the material world, it's a different thing altogether. That difference of opinion is on the level of reality, level of transcendence. Whereas in the material world, the difference of opinion is based upon one's karmic conditioning and how colored one's intellect is, and how much one is, what type of form of life one has, one's modes of nature, how they're acting on a person. And the general tendency is that we like to see ourselves as right. We like to see our intelligence as, is good. And especially when we have some relatively recognized position in this world of knowledge. We may be classified as a certain degree or PhD in a subject matter. And, pride, in other words, in the material world, pride, self-pride comes into the matter. And one argues because of self-pride. One doesn't want to admit defeat at the hands of somebody else. One likes to establish one's own superiority, one's own knowledge, etc. So one's intelligence is very busy trying to, and if we realize we can't, and the intelligence usually withdraws and we try to avoid it, or we simply agree with it even though we don't, just to avoid a clash. But this tendency to argue in the material world can be very, very entangling and very detrimental to the practice of devotional service. Wars are fought over it, and so many problems. Gossip is a very common, even amongst devotees. We relish sometimes hearing negativity. Hearing the problems of others, even if they're true or not true, is a kind of a rasa, kind of an indirect rasa, which we get from hearing the problems of others sometimes. I'm not saying everyone, but this is the subject of gossip. And we spread it around. And, generally speaking, it becomes perverted even more as it goes from one person to another. And nowadays, with the various types of social media which we have in our modern age, gossip is extremely common. It's very easy to spread untruths or mundane information really quickly through the internet. So it's a very dangerous thing to avoid. We try to avoid it. There are websites just wholly and solely dedicated to finding the faults in others, whether they're there or not is irrelevant. One has to find a fault and have to publicize it to everybody to make them look bad or whatever it is. And this is gossip. Debates, useless debates. Of course, there may be sometimes some philosophical debates, which may have some value to establish the truth, but generally speaking, it's not. Simply debating about useless subject matters. Fault finding in others, we just briefly mentioned that just now, but this is devotee is devoid of the tendency to find faults in others. This later on in the Nectar of Instruction, we find this, to associate with those devoid of the tendency to find faults or criticize others. On the mundane platform, in one sense, we're all in the condition of fault, but we shouldn't unnecessarily find faults in others. We should try to find out the faults in ourselves. Everyone is under the influence of faults, especially in Kali Yuga, Clairdoshia, and Devadana. The ocean of faults in Kali Yuga. There's no shortage of faults in Kali Yuga. But rather than finding faults in each other, it's better to encourage the goodness in each other as much as we can. If we can do that, that's nice. Or find out our own faults and see the goodness in others. Try to encourage that. It's maybe a little hard for us sometimes, but it's an elevated devotee's principle is that the spiritual master may also point out faults, but only for the sake of helping one to advance in Krishna consciousness. If one's in a position of authority and responsibility, then there may be some occasions, maybe many occasions, where one has to point out faults in those who one is responsible for. Not because of dislike, not because of one's pride, not because of one wanting to remove the person or make them feel bad, but rather to help clear their path of devotional service. So that's one part of a Mahatma or a leader in society or even a parent, etc., to remove the obstacles on the path. And it may be seen as fault-finding, and it may be fault-finding. It depends on the attitude. If the attitude of the person who's pointing things out is pride and hatred, anger, what like that, lust and so on, then for sure it is unfavorable. But if it's genuinely with the mentality to help the other person sincerely, with devoid of pride, then that's favorable. That can be favorable. So fault finding is seeing oneself from one's own angle and trying to further one's own ego. Out of pride, one may find faults in others, etc. And then we have speaking falsehoods. This may be in the material world, everyone's speaking falsehoods. Even the truth in this material world is a falsehood. The only truth is based on spiritual or absolute platform. All material world, in the sense, is a falsehood, covered by falsity. Because from the very beginning, it's like if we say, Prabhupada gives the example, if you say 1 + 1 = 3, everything else after that is a fault. Everything else is false after that, is incorrect. So the basic premise of thinking I am this body is a falsity. It's a falsehood. And everything else which stems from that, way Srila Prabhupada says, the original sin in this world is to identify with the body. And everything else after that, even though it may be seen as truthfulness, it may be seen as goodness, etc., is actually sinful in a sense, because it's based on falsity. Based on falsity. So as long as one is based on one's religion, one's philosophy, one's political adjustments, one's social life, everything, based upon this concept of I am the body, that's a falsity. So the whole of society is basically a falsehood. There's no actual truth in these type of endeavors as such. Of course, there's the shastric directions there. For those who are in this material world, there are different scriptures that will come up in Niyama Agraha, which are relevant at different stages of one's growth, whether it's growth or more evolved. There are scriptural directives for humans, at least. In animals, there's no such directives, but in the human species, there are religious directives which are there to help to gradually elevate the living entity's consciousness, to free the living entity from this mundane identity of identifying oneself as this material body and identifying others in relationship with oneself as favorable and unfavorable. In devotional service, we do have identification too, no doubt. And we do discriminate, but it's based upon that which is favorable for devotional service, not just that which favors my sense enjoyment. As in the material world, relationships are formed on that principle. They're not based on the principle of becoming Krishna conscious. So the religious scriptures are there in order to gradually transform the mentality of the conditioned soul from seeing everything in relationship to my own sense gratification to seeing things in terms of what is pleasing to Krishna. And it may not seem particularly like the preliminary stages of devotional service in the sense of being almost mundane religion, you could say, are favorable. But if they're properly practiced under the proper guidance, they can lead to the path of devotional service. The same thing on the path of devotional service. Most of us are practicing Karma Mishra Bhakti or Jnana Mishra Bhakti. We're very attached to our conditional perspective of devotional service. We want to do it my way. And we're very attached to simply accumulating knowledge, whether it's of any realistic use or not. It's another thing. We may be just attached to various, say, byproducts sometimes, or conditionings which we already carry with us, or some other person who has a particular nature, agenda, etc., which we're attracted to, and we want to imitate that, and we try to follow that. But the path of pure devotional service is devoid, it's devoid of these tendencies for enjoying the material senses or just making one's decisions based upon one's karmic conditioning or upon one's own philosophy, how one sees things, etc. We're supposed to see through Shastra Chaksus, through the eyes of scripture. But then that can also be a problem because sometimes we look at scriptures which are way beyond our ability to digest. The more advanced stages of devotional service, or we're very attached. Of course, this comes under the Agraha, so we won't go into any more detail on that, but we become very attached to a certain level. We may be getting respected at that certain level, and we're not willing to let go to advance to another level because we're still attached to respect, etc. Falsehoods. Many different varieties of falsehoods in this world. We don't need to go into the details, but we can all know around us, whether it's the public media, education system, the medical system, the scientists, everything comes into this category practically. Blaspheming devotees, well, now we're getting onto a more, specific aspect of Prajalpa, to blaspheme those devotees who dedicated their lives to propagating holy names of the Lord is the first offense against the holy name. It's the suremost way. It's known as, what is that? The mad elephant offense. Atimata? No, what is it? I can't remember. Anyway, the mad elephant offense. And this is very dangerous. It can destroy the forest or let's say, the garden of bhakti could be smashed by this offense. Our own, not the entirety, but our own particular little garden can be devastated by the mad elephant offense of blaspheming other devotees out of our own gross pride and false ego and whatever it may be. We've been offended. He offended me. Well, first of all, who is me? We don't know who me is. We think me is my mind and my karmic conditioning or my false intellectual perception of the truth. And when somebody interferes with that, we can get quite angry. We may start talking anything, maybe blasphemous words about, etc. Whatever it may be, out of envy, we may engage in such blasphemous activities of other Vaishnavas. It's the best way to destroy one's devotional service and to displease Krishna. We're here to please Krishna, not displease him. And of course, sometimes we have to, as we said earlier, we have to sometimes point things out, but it's not in the mood of bringing someone down, but rather to help to elevate. It's not blasphemy, just pointing out objects, certain aspects of their devotional practices which may be unfavorable. Again, that's a very delicate issue, and I'll have a reverse reaction sometimes if we point things out when people are not ready for it. Like yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. But we were listening to Srila Prabhupada lecturing about how, don't try to impose the rules and regulations on people until they're ready. Just get them to chant Hare Krishna. Come to the temple, take prasadam and chant Hare Krishna. When the time is coming, then of course rules and regulations are there to help us progress further. But they come afterwards. Somehow or another get people to chant Hare Krishna. So it's not that we start off with the 10 offenses or even the 4 regulated principles. People may ask, but we don't expect. When Prabhupada came to America, for instance, when he was in Boston, he actually said that I never expected these people to be able to follow the 4 regulated principles. He was hoping maybe some of them would start chanting Hare Krishna. And he was very surprised to see that people in this modern society, so to speak, were able to live without all these 4 prohibitions and many other things. Surprised. And that's the potency of Krishna's presence as the holy name and the good wishes of his pure devotee. So without the mercy of the pure devotee, we can't get Krishna. And the devotees, even though they may not be on that level of transcendental realization, they may not be absolutely pure, they're serving the pure devotees. So if you want, Prabhupada gives the example, if you want to please a man, you have to please the dog. If you say, I like you very much, but I don't like your dog, I hate those dogs, and you kick the dog over the wall, then certainly the man is not going to be very impressed. He'll probably punch us in the face. Because the dog is very dear. So the devotees, we may not be the topmost examples, but every devotee is very special. We may have our faults, we may have our attachments, our shortcomings. We have to be very careful. We don't always know who we're dealing with. We should find out who we are rather than pointing the pin. Sometimes the example is given, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj gives the example of the needle. A needle has a hole in it for putting the thread through. And the needle is criticizing the sieve. The sieve has 1,000, 10,000 holes or whatever it is, used for sieving grains. And the needle is criticizing the sieve is criticizing the needle. The sieve has 10,000 holes, and the sieve is criticizing the needle. Hey, needle, you've got a hole in you. But the sieve has 10,000 holes. So we look at our own shortcomings. One who's pure is in a position to see other things more clearly. But when we ourselves are full of faults, much of the time we're just trying to place our own faults on others many times. It's like that. Trying to avoid getting the faults out of our own consciousness, digging them out. We try to point them out in others. Politically, people do this too. When they have problems at home, they declare war. They start putting faults out in others. They start blaming others. Another common one, we blame others. Another kind of Prajalpa. We blame others for this and blame others for that. Why you don't do this? Why you don't do that? So on and so forth, And it's just usually an indication we're not doing our homework. What's another nice one here? Worldly talk, well, we've already basically discussed that, are all called Prajalpa. Obviously, it's extremely detrimental to one's devotional service. We don't have time to waste at any moment. We may have to leave this body. Well, imagine if we left our body, watching the television. We leave our body blaspheming a devotee. Leave our body, arguing over the weather or some mundane subject matter. What an awful thought. So if we don't practice, because all these tendencies are very strong in the conditioned soul. They're not like just happened. They've come through from previous lifetimes. How they manifest in detail may have changed. Now we have mobiles. We probably didn't have mobile in our previous lifetime. Most likely not. But it's just another way of expressing our various tendencies can be favorable or unfavorable, but it's expressed in various means. So it's the same thing coming out through different channels. So we want to change. It's not so much the channel that has to change, it's the subject matter of the channel. That which goes on through our senses and through the body and mind and everything else. So practice, countless lifetimes, we don't know how many, but quite a few lifetimes we've been practicing material life, practicing to see myself in the center. Somehow or another, there's a little endeavor now to try to see Krishna in the center of our lives. And thus we hear wonderful, wonderful pastimes. Krishna, I was reading this morning, Krishna playing with a Kaliya serpent, and just the absorption of all the devotees in Krishna, because they're all eternal associates of the Lord in these pastimes, but we're getting a glimpse of what it is. And there's hearing these pastimes is one of the most powerful ways to change these tendencies away from liking or desiring to hear mundane pastimes or topics concerning the conditional world, trying to control it and understand it in its details, etc., wasting our time trying to create another form of life. There are billions of forms of life every moment manifesting. Why waste our time trying to create one artificial one? Such a waste of a human life. This is all in the categories overlapping between Prayas, Atihara, and Prajalpa, and so on. But a waste of time, complete waste. We haven't got time to waste talking of nonsense. The whole world is talking of nonsense, lying and cheating and everything going on there. The birds, Prabhupada said, when they wake up in the morning, they all start, planning for the day. They have their morning istagosti to organize their day. Where are the worms? Where are the twigs? Where are the good trees? Whatever it is, they're all conversing with each other. What is it use for? I think in the commentary here, like toads croaking when the rain comes, the toads croak away and it attracts the snake of death. The snakes hear the croaking and then they go for the sound. Get the croaking frog gets swallowed by a snake. So people get swallowed by the snake of time, the snake of death in this material world because they're just simply croaking. So if we croak also, we'll have to come back again into this material world. So human life is meant to practice transforming our object of our attention away from ourselves, away from other living entities, towards Krishna. And that's the goal. Because when our attention is on Krishna, it's like watering the root of a tree. The whole tree benefits from that watering. So when our consciousness is focused more, Krishna says to Arjuna in all your activities, be conscious of me, your mind fixed on me, your intelligence, mind fixed on me, your activities dedicated to me, you will attain me without a doubt. So it's one thing to be working under one who is conscious of Krishna. That's certainly a very good situation. But ultimately, we should also become conscious of Krishna. Otherwise, the tendencies, our previous consciousness will come up, especially when we don't get what we want or somebody says something we don't like because of our conditional nature. We oftentimes resort to our previous conditional, attractions. Go back into the material consciousness again. We've got to fill that gap, big gap, fill our whole consciousness with Krishna consciousness, hearing, chanting, remembering the personality of God. So Krishna performs so many pastimes. So we have so many wonderful pastimes to hear about. The devotees, they can't bear the thought of separation from Krishna. Totally absorbed in Krishna, looking at his hair, his face, everything about him. And whether it's an anxiety, out of fear that the Kaliya serpent is going to kill Krishna, or whatever it is. And when Krishna releases himself from the coils of the Kaliya serpent, and he sees the distress in the hearts of all of his devotees, then they become elated, And then Krishna's drawing the attention. He's there. He's trying to draw our attention. So Krishna consciousness, even on the, you could say the external platform, is meant to draw our attraction. Deity worship, lovely prasadam, sweet kirtan, stories, so many things, exciting adventures. We're all meant to draw our attention away from the path towards death, towards the path towards Golok Vrindavan, or liberation of the jiva from this conditional mentality. So this Krishna Katha is the positive way of Prajalpa, and it's the only sure way of counteracting and releasing us from this tendency for mundane Prajalpa. Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. We'll go on a little bit, a few points here. For the practicing devotees, to read newspapers is a great loss. Well, yeah, people find it a great loss. Prabhupada tells a story one time of, it was in Sheffield in England or something, there was one story of a Christian preacher who's preaching to the miners. If you don't surrender to Jesus, you're going to hell. So the first question they asked, who's Jesus? What's his number? They thought maybe he's one of the miners. So they all have numbers in those days. And miners had numbers. So they thought he must have a number also. And then the preacher explained, no, he's their savior, he's the Son of God, la, la, la. We don't surrender unto him. They go to hell. Then they said, well, what is hell? And they said, it's a dark, dirty, nasty place, horrible. And they said, what's wrong with that? That sounds like our mind. We're working. You tell us, nothing wrong with that, sir. And because they go in the mine at 6 in the morning and come up at 6 at night, they'd hardly ever see the sunlight. Their whole life was dark, basically, miserable conditions. So the priest was thinking, how are we going to get through to these people? They're very entrenched in their ignorance. So then he was very clever. He said, but in hell there are no newspapers. Oh! They couldn't bear the idea of no newspaper. Of course, now we don't have newspapers so much, we have it online. But then, it was as a fact about 50 years ago, if you didn't get 3 or 4 newspapers a day, you were in anxiety. We used to wait. We used to stand at the door waiting for the newspaper to come through the letterbox. Right? Most families were like that. The newspaper was the highlight of the day. We'd fight over who could get the news. We'd share the news. We'd take it tear it into pieces, and everyone would read different pieces and then swap the pieces around. People were addicted to newspapers. In some countries, they had little countries, they had 3,000 editions a day, newspapers. Yugoslavia, 2,800 different newspapers daily. Small country. And it was so addicted to newspapers. And it's so unfortunate. Not a single iota of value in the whole thing. It's the same thing. Chewing the chewed. Punak, how's it go? Chewing the chewed. And chewing the chewed over and over again. Newspapers. So now we have news in different ways. It comes through the internet or through the mobile, whatever it is. Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj one time was asked, how can you, Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj wanted to have a daily newspaper about Krishna. Some gentleman, some scholar said, how can you do this? How can you have a daily newspaper about Krishna consciousness? And he pointed at it, he said, hold on. Every day there are hundreds of thousands of newspapers all over the world, so many editions of the newspaper, and they're just telling news every day of this little tiny mundane speck called the earth. And they find things to talk about every day to fascinate people's minds. So if you can do that, he said, I can produce, if I could, I had the means, a newspaper every second and never say the same thing twice about the spiritual realm. And we hear how in Nantashesh, the form of the Lord who's like the couch, the Lord of Vishnu, how he is constantly chanting the glories of the Lord with his thousands of heads, hoods, and mouths, and never does one mouth ever say anything that the other mouth has ever said. and they've been chanting for eternity. So the glories of Krishna are unlimited. We only hear a little tip of the iceberg when we hear the Krishna book or Srimad Bhagavatam. This is just a little sample, basically. It's totally pure enough to completely drown our consciousness, you could say, in Krishna consciousness, but it's only a tip. When we hear that Krishna killed, for instance, in the Krishna book, Srimad Bhagavatam, maybe 20 or so demons are killed by Krishna in Vrindavan. Outside also many others. But in Vrindavan, maybe 20 or so only. But how is that? I mean, there it says that Krishna usually killed 1 or 2 demons before he took prasadam every day. I mean, certainly within Vrindavan more than 10 days. So many demons, not mentioned. The demons are like demons in our hearts. They have to be killed. And by hearing Krishna's pastimes, these demons can be smashed, destroyed. It's like Krishna happily destroys all the demons who endeavor to enter into Vrindavan. They can't really enter into Vrindavan. But unless we're in Vrindavan, which means free of envy, under the shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna and his devotees, then we may be subjected to these demons, even though we're on the periphery or out on the surface of Vrindavan. They also become subjected to demoniac influences. You have to be very careful. Reading novels from another, maybe not so popular, I don't know. Maybe amongst the world like to read novels. What for? Sense gratification. Maybe relief, we say relief. In the beginning stages, recreation, these things are understood. But if we really want to progress beyond the beginning stages, then even reading mundane novels is of no value whatsoever. It's just sense gratification. Probably even went further to say that, well, to speak of mundane music, modern music, whatever. He even said Ravi Shankar was Maya. And most people think, oh, that's very nice guitar music. Oh. But it has actually nothing directly to do with Krishna, except for everything comes from Krishna. But we don't enjoy things separately from Krishna. Wants us another thing. We have to ask him. We don't ask our intelligence that question. So he wants to know. Another aspect of the pastime we were reading this morning of Kali Krishna was so nice. All the demigods, all the dancers and musicians came down with all, and Krishna finally defeated the Kaliya serpent. They all came down. They're all playing their instruments and dancing exactly in tune with Krishna as he's dancing. They're all playing their instruments, he's dancing on the hoods of Kaliya. And they can hardly keep up with him. The dancing is so furious and so exciting. They're all playing away. They're just completely according to the beat of Krishna. It's not on their own beat. Nobody's trying to show off their own talents. They're just simply glorifying Krishna. This is positive Prajalpa. Argument we've already mentioned. And Bhakti Vinod goes on to say arguing about directions even. Which way to go? When people are arguing, and they even fight over it sometimes and get really upset with each other. Places, where to go, mistakes and illusions. This makes the heart very tough, very hard-hearted, very hard-hearted. The idea is that we follow the directions of Guru Shastra Sadhu, which help us to apply these things in a way which will soften our hearts and not make them harder and more self-centered, attached to my own perspective of devotional service, so to speak. Let's see. Useless arguments, he says here, they arise out of, and it's also involved, he also includes in this the talk of the Mayavadis, although sometimes it's understood that they're also on the path of some kind of spiritual path, no doubt, but in terms of devotional service, there's the worst Prajalpa of all, is to hear the philosophy Shariraka of the impersonalists or the Mayavadis, because it can completely destroy the let's say the attraction or the devotional service. It can cover our consciousness so badly that we give up our pursuit of devotional service. It's the worst kind of Prajalpa for the devotee, to hear Mayavad philosophy. Useless arguments arise from envy or pride, aversion or attachment to sense gratification or foolishness or self-pride. Various things. And it's common that we talk about others in a negative way, in some also positive way if they happen to be our friends. We like to talk positively about them, and then naturally we try to relate ourselves to them. Or we talk unfavorably about others in order to improve my own position. Try to make myself some kind of icon or whatever. This is all Prajalpa. Talking about others, actually, Thakur says, in this regard, should be completely rejected. We should try to avoid it altogether. And then another type of Prajalpa, positive, it can be positive. Depends, again. If it's to establish one's own untruthfulness, then it's not, it's very bad. But if in the case of religious practice, like Prabhupada did, Srila Prabhupada never decried religion. He never put religion down in principle. May have explained of its mundanity, but he never put it down. Whether it's this Christian or Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim, whatever it is, Sikhism, whatever it may be. But he did, as acharyas do, point out the fallacy when people claim to be something and they're not following it. That was the main thing. But if one's pointing out one's own perspective of faults in other religions simply to establish one's own religion, then that is in the category of Prajalpa. But if one is doing it to help that person to actually achieve success in their religious practices, that is not Prajalpa. That's favorable. Debates, where are we? Yes. Debates arise only from a desire for conquest, to defeat others. Extremely abominable, he says. Fault finding arises only from imposing one's own bad habits on others. This should be given up in all respects. Speaking falsehoods is another form of useless talk. Worldly talk is completely rejected by renounced devotees. Householders may accept some worldly talk that is favorable to devotional service. If topics like archaeology, zoology, astrology, and geography are devoid of God consciousness, they should be rejected. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find this nice verse in the 12th canto. Shukadeva Goswami said, words that do not describe the transcendental personality of Godhead, but instead deal with the temporary matters, are simply false and useless. Only those words that manifest the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Lord are actually truthful, auspicious, and pious. Why? Because they're based on spiritual, they're eternal. They're based on the eternal reality, not just on the shadow or the dream. It's like having in a dream at night. Of course, there may be exceptions to this rule, but there really are exceptions. And we cannot accept our dreams as being absolute or truthful necessarily. Generally, dreams are concoctions, mental concoctions based upon the numerous experiences we have in this world. Sometimes people base their life upon such dreaming. But this is, if at all this is to be applied, it should always be corroborated or confirmed by realized souls, and not just taken as it is, as if, whatever I dream is the absolute, and whatever you dream is nonsense. Because you dream one thing and I may dream something else, and they don't agree with each other. So we have a fight over dreams. And that's basically what's happening in the material world anyway, even if it's not officially a dream. We're all in a dream cloud, thinking I'm this body, thinking I'm this and that. We're fighting with each other over these dreams. This is all falsehood. Then Sukadeva Goswami, only those words that manifest the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Lord are actually truthful, auspicious, and pious. Those words describing the glories of the all-famous personality of Godhead are attractive, relishable, and ever fresh. Indeed, such words are a perpetual festival for the mind, and they dry up the ocean of misery. What a nice verse. If you want to read that, that's the 12th canto, 12th chapter, text 49 and 50. Beautiful verse. They dry up the ocean of misery. They're a perpetual festival for the mind. always looking for festivities. Where many people in the world right now are feeling quite frustrated because their normal fields of festivity are being restricted because of the present pandemic. And they're all praying and hoping that Christmas season will be open and we can have a big festival and indulge ourselves in varieties of sinful activities, etc., etc. But this is their festival, bestial festivals, which people indulge in at this time of the year. For those on the spiritual path, is another kind of festival where we're glorifying Krishna, just like we glorify our birthdays in Mother Prajalpa. And this material world, on the birthday, praising each other, giving gifts, and all this nonsense, which goes on in the mundane world. But on the spiritual platform, festivals where with Krishna and the pure devotees in the center, we offer everything for Krishna's pleasure. You end up with the same thing because you still have a festival and a feast and maybe gifts, etc. But it's all offered to Krishna. It's all meant for Krishna's pleasure. That way you get material and spiritual benefit. In the material world, you get temporary material benefit and then a lot of that comes. So it's a whole different world. Festivals. We have to, otherwise we'll be looking for a material festival in the mind if we don't have this spiritual festival in our hearts. Kirtan, etc., etc. Speech in the form of blaspheming sadhus is a source of great inauspiciousness. We should make a vow, Bhaktivinoda said. In this life, I will never blaspheme sadhus. Then make a vow. In this life, I will never blaspheme sadhus. Devotees are sadhus, he says. By blaspheming them, all one's virtues are destroyed. Just the example, we can think of an example in the Bhagavatam of Prajalpa Daksha and the result of his blaspheming Lord Shiva and those of his associates who blasphemed Lord Shiva and his associates. And what the reaction for that was, we may know that Daksha lost his head. He ended up with a goat's head. And it's another story, of course. But very dangerous to blaspheme a Vaishnava. Who are we to judge like this? As if our spiritual master is bona fide, he tells us to act in such a way. Sometimes we have to, say protect our chastity, but never blaspheme a sadhu. Never. And better to avoid. If we don't understand, just don't go there. Let's see, that's the last end of the commentary. Among these instructions, the instructions to tolerate the urge to speak mentioned in the first verse, Vashravegam, is a conditional urge. Tolerate the urge to speak. But in this verse, it's constitutional. Never speak anything unfavorable to the pleasure of Krishna. By giving up Prajalpa, the urge to speak is permanently regulated. Giving up this tendency to speak negatively or uselessly and cultivate the constitutional propensity to glorify Krishna. Whoever indulges in praising or criticizing, this is also actually from the Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 28th chapter, verse 2. Whoever indulges in praising or criticizing the qualities and behavior of others will quickly become deviated from his own best interest by his entanglement in illusory dualities. We've been talking about others. This can be, because it goes on, and it naturally is going on. In some cases, it must go on. Just for the sake of it, without proper understanding of the situation, it's a sense gratification. And I don't know. I myself experienced this sometimes. We just talk for no reason about another devotee except it's a kind of a waste of time, a sense gratification, instead of glorifying Krishna, which is what Prabhupada wanted us to do. And we can point out the glorious service of other devotees, but it should be realistic also. But we can really try to focus more on pointing out Krishna's glories, hearing, chanting, and remembering more about Krishna. This was what Prabhupada wanted. This is what he taught us. Of course, devotees glorify the pure devotee of the Lord being non-different than Krishna in one sense, represented. But the main thing Prabhupada emphasized was to hear and chant and remember about Krishna, worship Krishna. Because we really want to please Prabhupada, that's practically his emphasis, to spread the glories of the holy name through these transcendental books, through the chanting of the holy names, etc., amongst devotees. Amongst devotees, it is very relishable to the heart and ear to associate with devotees and hear and chant about Krishna. That's what Prabhupada has formed this International Society of Krishna Consciousness for, to create a facility where we can do this. Then that Prajalpa becomes favorable. Kirtan, 24 hours kirtan sometimes. Prabhupada wanted that in our temples, but he also said that it's not possible everywhere, but he certainly wanted it in Mayapur and Vrindavan. And if elsewhere it's possible, it was also something that Prabhupada indicated. Constant hearing and chanting Srimad Bhagavatam and the holy names. So what would change our consciousness, change the environment, change the atmosphere? Okay, well, I'll finish there for today. And if there are any questions, you can please type them in on the chat. Hare Krishna. The last few days of Kartik, take advantage while we can of the Kartik month. I think, was it another week or so? I'm not sure.
Sunday.
Pardon?
Next Sunday.
Week tomorrow, okay. So another 8 days of Kartik months. But Prabhupada said, he said every day for a devotee is Kartik. Every day, because Kartik is specifically meant for offering everything to Krishna. Of course, this is the month of Radharani, as we know, but it's this means it's what pleases Krishna most is we satisfy Radharani. What pleases Radharani is we serve Krishna. So we serve him by chanting Hare Krishna. Please Radharani by chanting Krishna's names, and by the other obvious things, offering lamps, singing Damodarastakam, and so on. Pleasing to Krishna, pleasing to Radharani. This pastime very pleasing to Radharani. It's the most pleasing pastime to Radharani. Mother Yasoda binding Krishna with love. So you should meditate on this. It's to please, ultimately it's to please Krishna, you could say, but we're trying to serve under the direction of Srimati Radharani and her associates. So we have to try to act in a way. Aparada, offenses, means against Radha. So we want to become positive, pleasing, serve in a way which is pleasing to Radharani and thus pleasing to Krishna. So Kartik month is a very ideal month to try to cultivate this favorable mood. And get extra dividends in this month, extra credits in the month of Kartik. But Baba said for devotee, every day is Kartik, because every day is meant the same principle. It's not. In one place, Prabhupada said Kartik is especially for those who are not practicing devotional service, to try to get them a little bit involved, get them a little serious, at least for 1 month. But for devotees, they take advantage also of this wonderful month, this wonderful opportunity to reflect on their spiritual relationship, devotional service. So, questions, please. Let's see. Okay, by hearing someone blaspheme. Yes, it says, the first question is, by hearing someone blaspheme another devotee, am I still implicated in sin? Well, yes, but it depends how we relate to it. There are different ways a devotee is supposed to react when hearing blasphemy of another devotee. We don't blaspheme anyone in reality, of course. When a devotee doesn't, we may, but a real devotee doesn't. But as specifically mentioned in the verse or in purport, blaspheming devotees, if one hears the blasphemy of the Lord or the devotees, there are 3 things one's supposed to do. And the first thing is one's supposed to cut their tongue out. Now, if you're a Kshatriya, a real Kshatriya, we don't just mean someone who's angry and passionate and likes to fight for the sake of it. a real Kshatriya, one is very qualified, which you don't find in the world today. They may literally cut the person's tongue out, literally. But that won't go down very well in modern society, probably, even if you were such a qualified person. So the second thing is we're supposed to give up our own body when we hear blasphemy. When Prabhupada commented on that, when devotee asked him, he said, if you have to do that, there will be nobody left in the movement. Because every day we're hearing blasphemy. It's almost unavoidable. And he said like that. It may not be every day in our case, I don't know, but it is regular. And if you had to do that one, there wouldn't be many left. I mean, Sati gave up her body. If we were to follow in her footsteps, we'd all be gone by now, by far, by a long time ago. So he said the third injunction in Shastra is you immediately leave the place. Do not stay there. Move away. Don't listen. Away. Depart from that place. Is inauspicious situation. So that's the method we have, and it does affect us when we hear blasphemy, even if we go away. But blasphemy can be of a very varied form. I mean, when Gadadhar Pandit heard Bhagavad Bhatta's translation or commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, it wasn't exactly blasphemy, but indirectly, because it was critical of Sridhar Swami's commentary. Lord Chaitanya refused to hear it. So Gadadhar Pandit was forced to hear it. He was a very soft-hearted personality, and Bhagavad Bhatta had a lot of affection for him, and he forced him to hear it. Gadadhar couldn't get away, so he was feeling very bad and was fasting and all sorts of things. It purifies us, that feeling. But if we're thinking, very, very good, ooh, this is nice to hear this blasphemy of that so-called devotee, very well spoken. If we're thinking like that, then we're really in the soup. We're really in the deep, dark, dangerous zone. For that situation, we're definitely implicated. We're affected by, but you may not have to suffer the reaction and sense of hearing blasphemy if one's attitude is favorable. And the result will feel so bad about it, and it's called anuttapa in the heart, that it burns away the tendency to commit blasphemy ourselves. When we feel bad about having heard blasphemy, what to speak if we ourselves have blasphemed somebody? If one's a little fortunate, a little sincere, one will feel terrible, absolutely terrible, and will do anything to become free of that heinous behavior or activity, either hearing blasphemy or indulging in blasphemy. And that pain in the heart will be the process of purification. Otherwise, if we're thinking they deserved it, good on them, etc., then we're definitely implicated in terrible reactions, you could say. Knock at the door. Who's it? Somebody at the door. Hey, there we go. Another question. You have mentioned that we shouldn't impose rules and regulations on new devotees, but instead make them chant and take prasadam. But sometimes people tend to get stuck there and are reluctant to move ahead. So how can we help such devotees to make progress? Maybe we're stuck there as well. Sometimes it's because we're stuck. We're sort of stuck at a certain level. You can, preaching is an amazing thing in the sense that you can't really expect a person to go beyond. If we haven't got something, we can't really give it to them. If we haven't got any money, how can we give money to people? If we haven't got love of God, what can we do? We can refer them to somebody who's got it. We can direct them to the books. We can direct them to the, more advanced devotees, etc. In one sense. But yes, many people are stuck like that. We've seen devotees for 45, 50 years who are still prasadam bhaktas. They just come for prasadam. They just come when there's a good kirtan. Well, what to say? There's not. You can't force. You can bring a cow to the water, but you can't force the cow to drink the water. The cow has to take the mercy, to take advantage of it. At least they're still around. That's quite a miracle. That's quite amazing that their attraction is still there, or our attraction is still there to Krishna consciousness. Many people come and disappear for a long time. They will come back eventually, but many of just stay around. They just keep chanting and hearing. If we were more genuinely advanced, then there's more likelihood that they will also come forward. And you can pray for their welfare. Try to engage them in devotional service. One of the secrets is to engage people according to their proclivity in the beginning, maybe. Engage them in practical service, helping to give them find some way of engaging them in some responsibility. You don't have to be initiated to take some responsibility in the movement of Krishna consciousness. They could be, responsible for the gardens, responsible for delivery of the newsletters, responsible for, whatever it is, fundraising, something or another. Give them some feeling of want, connection. Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad Gita, generally speaking, the first attraction a person will have, genuine attraction, will be towards the services itself. So some kind of service that they're attracted to, this often brings people forward, often makes them want to go forward in their devotional lives, because Krishna cleanses their hearts if they're chanting Hare Krishna. It's also long term, but they're still indulging in mundanities. They're still, it's like an elephant bathing and then rolling in the dirt again. But when they start to engage in devotional service, the Lord in the heart, he removes some of these obstacles on their path, or these attachments in their path. They start to get a taste for the service and lose a taste for those things which are blocking them from going forward. They may be attached to intoxicants or whatever it may be. I mean, Prabhupada, he also, because there's more to it than that, but in the beginning of the movement, when Shyamasundara Prabhu was building the Rath carts in San Francisco, he would sometimes put building the cart and he was smoking at the same time. Prabhupada said, sometimes he put his cigarette packet on top of Lord Jagannath. It's not good to put your packet of cigarettes up there. Put it somewhere else, But he was so busily involved in building the cart for Lord Jagannath, his heart became cleansed and purified. So like that, try to engage them. You can't expect them to be Brahmins. Even we can. Who is a Brahmin? I don't say it's a good question, but it is a question. Who is really Brahminical? Most of us probably don't have the qualities mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, at least not very deeply. So, people have got some proclivities. To engage people according to their proclivities will help them to progress in their spiritual lives. Trying to find that out. Even going on Harinam Sankirtan instead of just coming for a party around the forest fire or whatever it is. But going out on the streets and chanting is very great service. Distribute prasadam. Anyone can distribute prasadam. You can get everyone to do that. And to some degree, you can get them to do it in their own homes as well. But in Africa, for instance, is a nice example. In 1975 or 6, I don't know, something like that, when Prabhupada was in Kenya, he wanted the devotees to distribute wooden Gorni ties to everybody, to the black people in the villages. They're not even vegetarians. He said, give them these. They look like voodoos. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're little black statuettes of Gorni tie with their fingers pointing out like this, like almost pointed features. He said, distribute them en masse to everyone, and just said, this is a lucky idols or something. If you say Hare Krishna in front of them and offer a piece of fruit, you'll become, you'll get good fortune. Even something like this, just simple, get people moving. It's okay, the hook is in. You can't expect it all the time. It's going to immediately burst into blossom. We keep trying. The essence from our point of view is we see it's due to our own insincerity or our own shortcomings, whatever. So we try to become a little more sincere ourselves. If they get the good fortune, we need good fortune to advance in spiritual, good fortune, taking advantage of association, and they will progress also. Who's next? What can help us? What can help us to keep balance between glorifying Krishna and doing our household duties? Sometimes we may get a little bit proud that we, now reading more about Krishna and chanting more, no time to meet devotees, or no time to visit family members. Yeah, this up and down balance. We go from oneness in our acharyas sometimes talk about this situation of back and forth renunciation and then sort of a bit of bhogatyaga type of thing. In this case, it's a little different. This question is referring to, let's say, what appear to be our duties in life to family, maybe to society to some extent. If one is a renunciate, then all the duties are more clarified, you could say. They're always to try to bring people to Krishna consciousness. For a householder, the same principle is there, but the balance maybe is somewhat varied. One has to maintain one's family healthily, and one has to nourish the family. One has to maintain a certain degree of social balance in one's life. Yes, it can be a fine line. It's not necessarily every situation is identical from grihastha to the next. The principle is the same, to do that which is favorable for one's holistic, is the word they use nowadays, holistic progress in spiritual life, natural balance in spiritual life. So in grihastha life, obviously one has to keep one's apartment clean. Obviously one has to nourish one's family. For that one obviously has to have an income. From what source is another thing, but some kind of income has to be there, which generally involves working, which means time, and it means you have to do your work well, otherwise you won't get an income. So, and if you don't get an income, then the family life will be turmoil, and if the family life is turmoil, then your devotional service will become turmoil, unless you're going to take sannyas or something. But as a grihastha, one has to get that balance to what creates a favorable atmosphere for practicing Krishna consciousness. Same thing with dealing with family members. If they become inimical towards Krishna consciousness because we ignore them, that can be detrimental to one's spiritual life. Each situation can be slightly different. It's good if mature grihasthas can be consulted as to how to balance these things in one's life a little more. It's definitely something. There are many, many forums in ISKCON where grihasthas are sharing these things with other grihasthas or those living at home, etc., how to get that balance of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. Some grihastha situations are very difficult. I know one devotee, his wife, if she finds her husband with his beads, she'll throw them in the garbage or in the fire. So you have to chant without her knowledge. That's an extreme case. And you get cases which are very easy because everyone's favorable to devotional service. Everyone's on the same page, so to speak. It's easy to serve together and help each other in the devotional practices in a very congenial way. So it depends. Each situation maybe has its own uniqueness to it, but as much as possible, we have in our home, in a grihastha home, we try to do everything for Krishna pleasure. We keep the house clean for Krishna. We try to only have things in the house which would please Krishna. At the same time, some kind of balance has to be there. We can't expect everyone else to be on the same platform all the time. So a certain amount of recreation may be required, a certain amount of time if the children are studying with the children to help them with their education, or recreation, taking them out sometimes. A certain amount of intimacy is required in family life between husband and wife. Certainly, we shouldn't go overboard. It should be that which is necessary to keep harmony, to keep the balance there as much as we can. But it's good to consult with mature grihasthas on details specifically pertaining to one's own particular case, because it'll vary from situation to situation. You can read more about this also. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, especially being a grihastha, spends quite a bit of time discussing these things in some of his writings, although he may not indulge or take part in reading others other than Prabhupada's books. It is mentioned in different sections in Prabhupada's books, but usually at a distance. Usually it's kind of spread out, not so specific. There is 7th canto, we can see the responsibilities for grihastha. 11th canto, also some discussion is there on grihastha ashram. But it's usually best to talk because everyone's individual. Everyone's got a unique situation. Talk to more mature grihastas and get some good guidance there, how to get this balance. This is from maybe a bit of an off-topic question. If you want to cook the best way for Krishna, why we do not taste? As worldwide it is known that the best chefs taste everything just and balanced before dishing out their food. So why not cook like that for Krishna? Yes, the result will be the best. So it must be most pleasing to him. Could you help me with the proper reply? Hare Krishna. That's a proper reply. Well, sometimes on the highest platform also this may be there. The devotee doesn't mind. All he's thinking of, a pure devotee, is what pleases Krishna. What pleases Krishna. And it's necessary, like Ramanujacharya, for instance, one of his disciples, I don't know where it's Govinda, one of them, he would test the bed before his spiritual master would rest just to make sure it was comfortable. And when it was pointed out to him, don't you know that if you lie on the bed of the spiritual master, you'll go to hell? And he said, I don't mind going to hell if my spiritual master is more comfortable. So in a certain light, yes, there are even exceptions to that sometimes, that pure devotees sometimes test to see if its preparation is perfect or not for Krishna. But that's on a high level. We're testing maybe not quite so much on a high level. It may not be so pure. So we follow the pure devotee. When we say a proper answer, what can we say? We try to cook things according to the direction of the pure devotees of the Lord. We follow recipes. The process of devotional service is not one of speculation. We may already have some knowledge of cooking, so we cook with that particular knowledge and depend on Krishna. The whole point is we're supposed to be working under the direction of Radharani and her associates. We're not really cooking. We're the instrument for the preparation for Krishna's pleasure. Again, this may be a little bit more than what we usually think, but this is the actual situation. We're assisting the pure devotees of the Lord preparing Krishna's lunch. We're not cooking to make money. Naturally, that cook will taste the preparation, because if it's not good, they won't make money, or they won't get recognized. They lose their job or something. But that's not the case here. We're cooking to please Radharani. We're assisting Srimati Radharani in her cooking to please Krishna. So the pure devotees of the Lord teach us the principles of cooking. And the main thing when we cook is not even the preparation itself, it's the consciousness in which we cook. The consciousness. Krishna is the enjoyer. We were reading yesterday Madhavendra Puri, famous story of Madhavendra Puri when he was in Remuna. And he'd heard that in Remuna they offer this amazing kheer, this preparation, condensed milk preparation to Gopinath. And Madhavendra Puri started to think, if only I could taste a little of this kheer, then maybe I could understand how to prepare such a preparation for my Gopal. But at that moment, he realized the offering was on the altar. It wasn't yet offered. He became absolutely ashamed of himself, that he was thinking of tasting it, and Krishna still taking his prasadam, taking his meal. He became completely ashamed. This is the mood of a devotee. It's the mood, not so much the taste. The taste isn't one of an external experience. The taste is internal, that Krishna is pleased. So everything in devotional service is in that mood. And we hear what pleases Krishna through those who know how to please Krishna, through the pure devotees. So certainly when it comes to prasadam, in the beginning, such considerations may not always be so absolute. Sometimes people may be cooking at home, they're really new, and they're licking their fingers and things. In the beginning, Prabhupada had this in New York. Those would sometimes lick their fingers in the kitchen and things. Taste, that's yummy. But it's baby, like babies do that sort of thing. Where babies For the more mature stage, we don't do that. We follow the direction of the pure devotee of the Lord. That's the main reason. What pleases Radharani? What pleases? We're her assistants or her assistants, assistant. Servant of the servant. So to develop that mood is the essence of our service. It's not just to produce nice tasting food. That will automatically come. That will automatically come, even if it's very simple. The result will be real taste for devotion, not taste for the nice samosa or the gulab. That may be there in the beginning. And devotees who are really in that mood, you'll find that the quality of their cooking is impeccable. It's so good. Krishna inspires them within the heart. We're taking shelter of Krishna, not our tongue. That's the idea. Yes. Well, there we go. That looks like it. Looks like it.
Another question.
Huh? We have a question from the floor here. Yes, please.
Thank you, Maharaj. Sometimes we hear criticizing of devotees from the seniors.
From the where?
Sometimes. And sometimes it is in order to teach us something how we should not do. So how to distinguish when it is Prajalpa or when it is positive?
Sometimes we hear criticism of devotees
from senior devotees.
From seniors. Criticism is again interpreted. It can be interpreted. What entails criticism? It can be correction, or it can be seen from one angle. Criticism it is an interpretable situation. It depends on the attitude, on the mood, on the purpose behind it, how we take it, and the reason or the field. It can be protective if it's done in the right light. If it's a senior who's giving some, maybe we have a tendency to associate with somebody, and actually that association may not. I'm just saying it's interpretable. But this is like taking one extreme. It may not be good for our spiritual life. We're attracted because of our conditional nature to their particular conditional devotional service attracts our attention. So we may hear somebody saying you shouldn't associate with them. It's not good. In order to, like a parent with a child, sometimes children have a tendency to associate with people who may not always be such good association. They tempt them with various things. It's quite common. The parents may have to warn them that that person is not a good character. You shouldn't associate. Now, whether the child follows or not is another thing. The parent's intention is that. It may be a better way of the result. The effect will be if it actually has a beneficial effect on the receiver. Otherwise, one has to have a different approach to that. Those who are giving that advice, at least from our point of view, yes, we should take it as being learning a lesson. If it's a scene, it depends again whether it's a blasphemous remark or whether it's meant genuinely speaking for our spiritual advancement. If so, we should try to understand it. Inquire and from that person and how to understand that more deeply and see if it's a genuine intention. We're not blind followers, but at least we have to inquire about that. And right now, yes, we can learn something from that situation. It's possible. We may learn when we hear these type of things. We're very attached. It depends if it's based upon our sense gratification. We like the association because it enhances my own mixed nature, my own materialistic nature, and then we can understand that may be for our favor. And we may or may not accept it, that's another thing. But we should always try to see, and if you go into the more specific, Prabhupada writes, in terms of, let's say, you could use the same example, but in terms of someone criticizing us, Prabhupada said we should always try to see how Krishna's speaking through this other person, no matter what it is. It may be positive or negative, but there's some lesson being taught here. He's pointing out something in my own heart. We try to see things in our own heart. When we hear these type of things, we try to see these tendencies in our own heart and try to, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur said there, make a vow that I will never criticize or blaspheme Vaishnava. You may not see that. Again, if we see why are they criticizing, or why are they correcting it, it's a fine line. It's a matter of our own hearts, our own perceptions, our own understanding. But we just have to pray that we take it in the right way. We can't always. Krishna's testing us. He's testing us. He's seeing, you'll find these things go on again and again and again. As long as it's an artery in our heart is still there, we have this tendency to criticize others. We'll find ourselves in this situation again and again and again in this world. People may not recognize us, they may criticize us, or they may put us down for our association, or what we're doing, or whatever it may be. But Krishna wants to get free of this pride, this false ego, etc. Okay, I think we're finished there. It's now 11, hour and 50 minutes. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. We'll have a kirtan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Harinama Sankirtan ki jai, Brihat Madanga ki jai, Gaur Premanandi Kartik Vrata ki jai. Thank you all very much. So glorious to all of your services, wherever you are, in the train, the bus, the car, the group, places there.
Thank you, Maharaj. There you go.
In their car driving somewhere.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, all glorious to Prabhupada.
Thank you,
Haribo!
Maharaj.
Haribo!
Haribo!
Again, to the
Thank
end
you
of the
from
year,
Scotland.
2 million
Thank you for-
Bhagavad Gitas, okay?
Haribo.
Right, 2
Thank you
million
from
Bhagavad
Wellington.
Gitas.
Hare Krishna.
It's a
Hare
campaign,
Krishna
Gita campaign.
from Scotland, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Haribo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Oh, Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Newcastle. Haribo. Wherever you are, in Amsterdam, in New Zealand, Australia, Rotterdam, Germany, Czech Republic, wherever you are, everywhere.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. From Scotland.
Scotland, ki jai. Scotland, okay. Okay, the new. Good on you.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Gurudev.
Haribo from Dublin, from Belfast, ki jai. Hare Krishna, Australia, Philippines, New Zealand, yes. Haribo.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Jai Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Haribo.
Haribo.